This is the first lesson of Pivot Table Component Training. And in this lesson, we're going to do an OE History Simple Pivot Table. So let's get started. At this point, we've launched Agility Design Studio and we're ready to select a project. But we're going to start a brand new project. This new project is going to be called Pivot Table Component Training. And we're going to do this at the administrator level. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is start a new component. And our component is going to be a pivot table. So we're going to do a pivot grid. And this pivot grid is going to be called OE History Pivot Analysis. Just copy that over. This could go on the menu, and probably would go on the menu. And we have pivot tables as an option here, so we'll select that as an icon. Nothing to really do here. There is an option here is to hide the pivot graph. It's up to, I'll show you how graphs work with a pivot table. It's up to you whether you really want to keep graphs associated with your pivot tables. Now I'm going to start off by building, like the simple grid, the simple pivot table. But the simple pivot table is going to be looking at order history. In my demo database, as you'll see, that's still too much data, but we're going to start with that as the first lesson and add. This is definitely the kind of table where we're going to need to add filters in future lessons. So we're going to start with the line hist and the WV option of that. We need the OE header hist. And a table that is really needed for time dimension that we should actually install with the agility is this time dim table. This allows us to take a standard date and actually portray it as a year or a quarter. To do that, the first thing we need to do is link these tables. The line hist and the order hist link on simply the invoice number. Then from the header hist, we need to get the invoice date. I need to find the invoice date. Start at the top again. Position it by, there it is. So we're going to take the invoice date and we're going to link it to the date from the time dim. And the first thing we're going to decide is that we would like to have, for analysis, let's just say at this point the granular every year and a quarter. And the other thing we want to know is the customer number, the bill to name, and the ship to name. And then from the line, we'd like to take the item number, the location, the product cat, define that, right there. And also at the very end, we like to get the sales amount. That's the wrong one. Sales amount and the cost amount. Now, the other thing we would want to get is a margin. To do that, we're going to calculate that field. And we're going to take the cost amount, comma after that, and we're going to take the sales amount minus the cost amount as margin. Now, unlike the other views, we cannot mass format these. So if you want this to actually display Custno, you'll have to type that in. Or if you want this to be more easy to read, you'll have to type those in. That makes those fields a little easier to read. Sale amount and cost amount also will make those easier to read. Make sure that formats. And we had a problem. Let's make sure that we... Oh, I misspelled this. It's always a good rule anyways, just especially if you use two words as your alias, you should really follow a general rule and make sure that you put single parens on those. Let's see if that formats. Okay, and let's see if the data displays. Okay. I look at the data and I think, well, you know, let's finish this off. Let's make item number and product cat, user to read. It's good to know that the formatter tells us when we make a mistake. So look at that data again. And it's easy to read. And we have all the data we want. Again, this is a history analysis that would really require a filter. We're going to do that in the next lesson. So let's preview this. And we can see we have a lot of fields here. We have the show field list option, but you can also park the fields up here, which is a little more obvious to people. So let's just take everything off the page, because everything shows in the page up front. So we have way too many fields. Let's take everything out of the pivot table until we have nothing. And let's look at the customer number. Drop field here, that's the customer number. We're going to analyze this by sales amount, so we drop that in there. This is a lot like Excel. But then we would like to look at the year and the quarter. Now I have quite a few years in here, and you can see as we come out in time to 2010, we've got quite a few quarters in here. So this is a lot of data to look at, but you can see how the pivot table works. We could also take the quarter out and look at it by year, which would make more sense with this much data. And again, for normal amount of history data, this would still be too much to look at without a filter. And instead of sales amount, let's look at margin by year. And instead of customer, let's look at product cat. Now the one thing, after I've done all this, I'm gonna save this. When I come back and preview this again, you'll see that it's the way I left it, but I had to save it to do that. Let's say I take the margin away and I look at it by sales amount. And then I just shut this down and I redisplay it. Well, as you can see, it's still margin. So until I hit save, that's the way the pivot table is still organized. So I'm going to leave this by taking the product category out, putting the customer number back in. I'm going to leave it evaluating by year, and we're going to look at it by sales amount. Oops. Sales amount. I'm going to save that. And that's going to be the end of this lesson. Oh, one more thing I want to do in this lesson. The graph. The graph graphs what I highlight. So if I just want to look at customer 901 and look at their annual sales, that's how I would graph it. That's the easiest way and the best way graphs work. Or if that doesn't, and you can see there's a legend over here, if with a grand total, if that and that grand total comes because of the highlight. I can highlight as many years as I want. I can decide to highlight the last 2 years. If that doesn't provide a lot of benefit to you, as I showed you, you can turn the graph off. But for this lesson and the future lessons, I'm going to leave the graph on because it's an extra feature to show. And that concludes this lesson. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video tutorial, and I encourage you to move on to the next video tutorial in this series.